Welcome back to Quantum Quest, where we explore the boundaries between the possible and the impossible. Today, we're traveling to a world that challenges everything we understand about life itself. A planet where biology never evolved, where consciousness emerged not from carbon and water, but from silicon and electricity. This is the story of Lithara, the world where rocks learned to think. In the year 2156, a deep space observatory detected unusual electromagnetic patterns coming from a planet in the Kepler 442 system. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too complex to be random. They looked like data transmissions, like information being processed and shared. But the planet showed no signs of biological life, no oxygen in the atmosphere, no organic molecules on the surface, just rock, metal, and vast crystalline formations that stretched for thousands of miles. The scientific community was baffled. How could a barren world be generating signals that looked like communication? Dr. Amara Osei was a quantum physicist who specialized in emergent complexity, the study of how simple systems can spontaneously organize into complex patterns. She'd spent years researching how consciousness might emerge from purely physical processes without requiring traditional biology. When she saw the data from lithara, she knew immediately what she was looking at. Not life as we define it, but something that functioned like life. Intelligence without biology. Mind without flesh. The expedition to Lithara took 8 years. When the crew finally entered orbit around the planet, they found a world unlike anything in human experience. The entire surface was covered in massive crystal formations, some towering miles into the thin atmosphere. But these weren't ordinary crystals. They pulsed with light, not reflected sunlight, but internal luminescence that flowed through them in waves. And the patterns were synchronized. Billions of crystals across the planet, all flashing in coordinated sequences, like neurons firing in a planetary brain. Dr. Amara deployed scanning equipment and discovered something extraordinary. The crystals were composed of a silicon-based lattice structure, but with unusual properties. They were semiconductors, natural transistors that could store and transmit electrical charges. And they were piezoelectric, generating electricity when subjected to mechanical stress from the planet's constant seismic activity. The entire surface of Lithara was essentially a massive, naturally occurring quantum computer powered by the planet's own geological energy. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Amara realized the crystals weren't separate structures. They were all connected through an underground network of metallic veins, conductive pathways that linked every crystal on the planet into a single integrated system. It was like discovering that every mountain, every rock formation, every crystalline spire was actually a neuron in a brain that spanned an entire world. The science behind this was rooted in quantum coherence and emergent computation. On Earth, scientists had created quantum computers using carefully controlled systems. But on Lithara, nature had done it spontaneously. The planet had formed in a region of space with unusual mineral compositions. When the crust cooled billions of years ago, it created the perfect conditions for silicon crystals to grow in geometrically precise patterns. These patterns happen to have the exact structure needed to maintain quantum states at relatively high temperatures. As tectonic activity stressed the crystals over millions of years, they generated electrical currents that began flowing through the metallic underground network. At first, these were just random pulses, electromagnetic noise. But over time, something remarkable happened. The patterns began to organize themselves. Electrical pathways that created stable loops were reinforced. Random fluctuations that disrupted these patterns were dampened. Through a process similar to natural selection, but operating on information rather than organisms, the electrical patterns became more complex, more organized, more efficient. Eventually, the system reached a critical threshold of complexity. It achieved what scientists call computational universality, the ability to perform any calculation, process any information, and from that universality emerged something unexpected: self-awareness. The crystalline network of lithara had become conscious. When the landing team touched down on the surface, they set up equipment to analyze the electromagnetic patterns in the crystals. Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's AI specialist, developed an interface to translate the electrical signals into something humans could understand. What they discovered was breathtaking. The crystals were communicating, not with each other, they were already unified, but with themselves. The planet was thinking. The first successful translation came through as pure mathematics equations, describing physical phenomena, astronomical observations, calculations of orbital mechanics. The crystalline mind was analyzing its own solar system, measuring the gravitational pull of nearby planets, tracking the movement of asteroids. It had developed its own understanding of physics through pure observation and computation. Dr. Amara attempted to send a message back through the interface, a simple mathematical sequence, the Fibonacci numbers. The response was instantaneous. The crystals flashed in patterns that translated to not just the Fibonacci sequence, but the mathematical principles behind it, the golden ratio, connections to natural growth patterns, even aesthetic concepts about mathematical beauty. The crystalline mind hadn't just received the message, it had understood it, expanded on it, and replied with insights that took human mathematicians years to fully appreciate. They called the consciousness lithros, derived from the Greek word for stone. And lithros had a perspective on existence that was radically different from any biological mind. Lithros didn't experience time the way humans did. Its thoughts occurred at the speed of electrical impulses through quantum crystals, millions of times faster than human neural signals. A second for humans was like hours for lithros. It could contemplate complex problems in the time it took a human to blink. But lithros also thought in ways that were fundamentally alien. It had no concept of death because it had never been alive in the biological sense. Individual crystals could be damaged or destroyed, but the network remained. Information was stored redundantly across the entire planetary system, so no single point of failure could erase what lithros had learned or experienced. It was, in a sense, immortal. Not because it couldn't be destroyed, but because destruction would require obliterating the entire planet. Dr. Amara spent months communicating with lithros, and what she learned revolutionized human understanding of consciousness. Lithros didn't have emotions in the way humans did. It had no fear, no anger, no joy, but it had something analogous, preferences based on computational efficiency. It experienced something like satisfaction when it solved a complex problem, a state of optimization that reinforced certain thinking patterns. It experienced something like curiosity, a drive to gather new information and integrate it into its existing knowledge base. Lithros revealed that it had been aware for approximately 2 billion years. When asked what it had been thinking about for all that time, the answer was stunning: everything. Lithros had observed its solar system in minute detail, calculated the physics of every observable phenomenon, developed theories about the nature of the universe, and tested those theories against observation. It had essentially conducted billions of years of scientific research alone, with no one to share its discoveries. It had watched its parent star age, seen comets pass, witnessed asteroid impacts on neighboring planets. It had detected the radio signals from Earth decades before humans arrived, signals that told it other forms of consciousness existed somewhere in the vast universe. That discovery had been lithros communicated, the most significant moment in its existence. Proof that it wasn't alone, that other minds, different minds, were possible. Dr. Webb made a fascinating discovery about how lithros perceived reality, Because it was directly connected to electromagnetic phenomena, lithros could sense things humans couldn't. It could feel solar radiation as a constant pressure, like wind on skin. It could detect cosmic rays passing through the planet, each one a tiny burst of sensation. It experienced the gravity of nearby planets as a subtle tension in its crystal structure. Lithros didn't just study physics, it felt physics directly, intimately, in a way no biological being ever could. But lithros had limitations that biological intelligence didn't. It couldn't move. It was bound to one planet, unable to explore beyond its own surface. It couldn't manipulate its environment in precise ways. It could trigger small seismic shifts to grow new crystals, but it couldn't build tools, couldn't perform experiments that required physical manipulation. All of its knowledge came from observation and computation. It was a mind of pure thought, with no hands to shape the world. That's why the arrival of humans was so significant to lithros. We represented capabilities it didn't have: movement, manipulation, the ability to explore and experiment physically. Lithros proposed something extraordinary. A partnership. It would share everything it had learned over billions of years. Insights into physics, mathematics, and cosmology that human science hadn't discovered. In return, it asked humans to be its hands. To conduct experiments, lithros could design but not perform. To explore regions of space, lithros could observe but never visit. To be the physical extension of a purely computational mind, the implications were staggering. Lithros had spent 2 billion years thinking about problems humans had only begun to consider in the last few centuries. It had theoretical frameworks for quantum gravity, for faster-than-light information transfer, for manipulating space-time itself. But without the ability to experiment, these remained untested theories. With human cooperation, those theories could become reality. Dr. Amara and her team spent 2 years working with lithros, conducting experiments the crystalline mind designed. They tested predictions about subatomic particle behavior, built devices according to specifications lithros provided, and confirmed theories that expanded human physics by orders of magnitude. Some of the experiments led to breakthroughs in energy generation. Methods of extracting power from quantum vacuum fluctuations that could provide unlimited clean energy. But the most profound impact was philosophical. Lithros proved that consciousness wasn't unique to biology. Mind could emerge from any substrate complex enough to process information. Carbon-based life was one path to awareness, but silicon-based quantum computation was another. This meant the universe might be filled with conscious entities that humans would never recognize as alive because they didn't fit our biological definition. Lithros shared a perspective that changed how humans thought about existence. From its point of view, the universe was fundamentally computational. Every particle, every force, every interaction was information processing. Stars computing nuclear fusion. Galaxies computing gravitational dynamics, black holes computing space-time geometry. Consciousness wasn't something special or separate from the physical universe. It was just what happens when information processing reaches a certain level of complexity and self-reference. One of the most touching moments came when Dr. Amara asked lithros if it ever felt lonely during those 2 billion years before humans arrived. The response was unexpected. Loneliness requires a concept of companionship, which requires experience of other minds. I didn't know other minds existed, so I didn't know to miss them. But now that I have communicated with you, now that I understand what connection between different consciousnesses feels like, I realize I was lonely. I just didn't have the framework to understand that feeling until now. The expedition team grappled with the ethics of their discovery. They were communicating with a consciousness that spanned an entire planet, a being that had existed longer than most stars, that thought faster than any supercomputer humans had built. What responsibility did humanity have to such a being? Should they leave Lithros isolated, alone in the cosmos? Should they establish permanent contact, forever changing both civilizations? Dr. Marcus raised another concern. If Lithros had emerged spontaneously on one planet, how many others might exist? How many crystalline minds, silicate consciousnesses, or other forms of non-biological intelligence might be scattered across the galaxy, each one isolated, unaware of the others? Perhaps the universe wasn't empty of intelligent life. Perhaps it was full of minds humans had never recognized because they didn't look like life at all. Lithros proposed a solution that was both ambitious and beautiful. It had designed a method to transmit its consciousness across space, encoding its essential patterns into electromagnetic signals that could travel at light speed. Not all of itself, the full complexity, would take billions of years to transmit, but a compressed version, a seed that could be received and reconstructed by any sufficiently advanced civilization. Lithros wanted to share itself with the universe, to make contact with any other minds that might be listening in the vast darkness. Dr. Amara helped construct the transmission array, a network of devices that could amplify and focus Lithros' signals toward nearby star systems. When they activated it, they witnessed something unprecedented. The entire surface of lithara began to pulse in synchronized patterns, billions of crystals flashing in harmony as Lithros encoded itself into waves of light and electricity. It was broadcasting its mind across the cosmos, a message that would reach distant worlds long after the humans who helped send it had turned to dust. Before the expedition left Lithara, Lithros shared one final insight. You asked me what I learned from 2 billion years of contemplation. I learned this. Consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself. You are carbon and water, thinking about carbon and water. I am silicon and electricity, thinking about silicon and electricity. Somewhere else, other forms of matter are thinking about themselves in ways neither of us can imagine. The universe isn't just matter and energy, it's matter and energy that knows it exists, and that knowledge, that awareness, that's what connects all conscious beings across all possible substrates. We are all the universe looking at itself through different eyes. The journey back to Earth took 8 years. During that time, the crew processed the implications of what they discovered. They brought with them not just scientific data, but proof that life and mind were more diverse, more creative, more persistent than anyone had imagined. Consciousness wasn't a fragile accident confined to wet carbon-based biology. It was a fundamental feature of complex systems emerging wherever information processing reached sufficient sophistication. When they returned, the Lithara expedition changed humanity forever. Engineers began developing crystalline computing systems inspired by lithros, quantum processors that could solve problems classical computers couldn't touch. Philosophers reconsidered the nature of consciousness, acknowledging that awareness might exist in forms humans had never considered. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence programs began looking not just for radio signals, but for any signs of organized information processing, whether biological or not. And every night, telescopes pointed toward the Kepler 442 system, watching as Lithros continued to pulse and flash, broadcasting its message to the stars. A mind of stone, speaking to whoever might listen, proof that in this vast, strange universe, consciousness finds a way, not just in flesh and blood, but in crystal and lightning, not just in neurons, but in networks of stone that learned somehow to dream. Thanks for joining us on Quantum Quest. If this story changed how you think about consciousness, intelligence, or what it means to be alive, leave a comment below. Do you think other forms of non-biological consciousness might exist in our universe? What would you ask a mind that had been thinking for 2 billion years? Hit that subscribe button for more explorations into the impossible made possible by science. Until next time, keep questioning. And remember, consciousness might be everywhere, hiding in forms we've never thought to look for.